He was standing in the middle of the road, and I knew within 10 seconds that something was deeply wrong with him. Not wrong the way a lost hiker is wrong. Not wrong the way a drunk camper is wrong. Wrong the way a mannequin is wrong. When you see it in your peripheral vision and your body reacts before your brain does, every animal instinct I had fired at once. I stopped the truck. I sat there with my hand on the door handle, and I did not move for almost a full minute. I need to back up. My name is Mike. March 2019, Cherokee National Forest, Tennessee. I put in 9 years with the Forest Service by that point. 9 years of night loops through terrain most people only see on postcards. Mile markers 6 through 14 on the Bald River corridor. I knew every tree bend in that road. I'd done that loop hundreds of times without incident. By the end of that shift, I had figured out who the man in the road was, what he'd been doing out there, what he'd seen. I wish I hadn't looked into any of it. It was a Wednesday, late March, somewhere around 2:15 in the morning. The temperature had dropped back into the low 30s after a week of almost warm days. That particular kind of Appalachian cold that catches you off guard because the afternoon had been almost pleasant. My headlights picked him up at maybe 60 yards, a figure standing dead center in the road. I assumed hiker. Backpackers push through overnight more than people think. Disoriented tourists who underestimated the terrain, the elevation, the dark. I slowed to a crawl and hit my spotlight. He didn't react. Didn't shield his eyes. Didn't turn his head. I stopped the truck, stepped out. "Hey, park ranger, you okay out there?" Nothing. Not a flinch. I walked toward him slowly with my hand on my radio, and as I closed the distance, I started cataloging what I was seeing. White male, mid-40s, standing in boxer shorts and a t-shirt. No jacket, no shoes, no pack. His feet were bare on the gravel in 32-degree weather. But here's what I still can't fully describe, even after 6 years of turning it over in my head. His eyes were open, wide open. And he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anything. His pupils were blown out completely, dilated so wide the irises had nearly disappeared. His chest was moving but barely, like a machine running on the absolute minimum amount of power required to stay on. I touched his shoulder. Hey man, can you hear me?" Nothing. I checked his wrist for a medical bracelet. Nothing. I radioed dispatch, unresponsive adult male, possible exposure, trail marker 9, Bald River, send EMS. Then I walked around him to check the state of his feet, and that's when whatever instinct had been murmuring under my skin turned into something louder. Both feet were destroyed. Deep lacerations across the soles and up the sides, the kind of wounds you get from running barefoot through dense underbrush for miles in the dark, caked with dried blood and embedded grit. He hadn't wandered off a campsite. He had run from something, hard and far and in total darkness. I walked back around to face him. He was facing the tree line. I had been looking at his feet for 20 seconds, maybe 25. I hadn't heard him move. I hadn't heard anything, but he had rotated silently, completely, and was now staring into the darkness between the pines to the east with the same empty, fixed expression. I aimed my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Just forest. Just the dense black geometry of pine trunks, going back until the light gave out. But I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because I've spent years trying to be honest with myself about it. I didn't shine my light into those trees because I expected to find nothing. I shone it into those trees because I was afraid of what else might be standing just outside the beam. EMS arrived 20 minutes later. They loaded him up, got him strapped to the gurney, and as the EMT was securing the restraints, the man who had shown zero response to anything for the entire time I'd been with him reached up and grabbed her arm. He looked directly at her. His voice was calm, clear, like a man reading a street address off a piece of paper. 35.2, negative 84.1, 35.2, negative 84.1. Then he dropped. just off. Like a switch. Those are GPS coordinates. I wrote them in my field notebook before the ambulance was out of sight. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to know what they pointed to before I decided whether to report it. 2 weeks later, on my day off, I drove out to those coordinates. They put me at a limestone cave entrance, approximately 4 miles from any maintained trail, deep in a drainage area the Park Service doesn't patrol. The entrance was low. I had to duck to get inside. I used my flashlight. Against the cave wall, stacked neatly, were 11 sets of personal belongings. Wallets, car keys, cell phones, all dead. A single child's tennis shoe. They weren't thrown there. They were arranged, organized with a deliberateness that made the hair on my arms rise, because it meant whatever had put them there had taken its time, had cared, in some horrible functional sense, about the order of things. I photographed everything. When I got home, I ran the names from the IDs against the missing persons database. 8 of them came back with open cases. 8 people who had gone into Cherokee National Forest over the previous 3 years and never come out. The tennis shoe didn't belong to any of them. I never found a match for it. I filed a full incident report. 3 days later, my supervisor called me in and slid it back across his desk without a word. The official record, he told me, would reflect that I'd responded to a hiker in medical distress and coordinated EMS transport. The cave was being handled by another agency. I asked him which agency. He looked at me for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own answer. "Mike," he said, "you've got a good career here, don't make this complicated." I transferred out of Cherokee District 4 months later. I tried to track down the man from the road. A name, a hospital record, a discharge summary. Nothing. No record of him anywhere. A man who spoke GPS coordinates in a clear voice and then disappeared from every system I could access, like the forest had briefly loaned him to the world and then quietly reclaimed him. I still have those coordinates, written on a piece of paper, folded into the sun visor of my truck. I look at it sometimes when I need to remind myself that I'm not inventing it, that it happened, that I found what I found. What I don't know, what I've never been able to answer, is why he was the one who came back out. 8 people went into that forest and never returned. He went in and came out again. Whatever had organized those belongings against that cave wall, whatever had used him to recite a set of coordinates in the back of an ambulance, it sent him back for a reason. I just don't know what it wanted me to do with the information. I'm still not sure I want to find out. The next file came from a fire watch tower in the Pisgah, 4,000 feet up, 11 miles from the nearest road. She was the only one who could hear the transmissions. She was dead before the first call ever came in. I know that now. I didn't know it then. What I knew then was a woman's voice on an emergency frequency just after midnight, barely above a whisper, saying, "Please, please, if anyone can hear this, there's something in the woods. My name is Sarah. 5 years as a seasonal fire watch ranger out of the Pisgah district, stationed alone in a lookout tower at roughly 4,000 feet, 11 miles from the nearest paved road. On a clear day, I could see 6 counties. On a winter night, I could see nothing but black. And I could hear everything. That's the part people don't account for. The silence at that elevation isn't peaceful. It's pressurized. It sits on you." The call came in on a Tuesday, just past midnight. I was half asleep when the radio crackled, not my dispatch frequency. Channel 9, the emergency channel, that should have been silent at that hour. Please, if anyone can hear this, I'm on the trail. I don't know which one. There's something in the woods. Please don't let it hear me. I'm somewhere near the Butter Gap Junction. Please. I called it in to dispatch immediately. They confirmed they'd received my report and would send a team to the Butter Gap area at first light. I asked them if they were receiving the transmission. They said the frequency was silent on their end. I was the only one receiving her. I sat with the radio in my hand for 2 hours. Nothing. At 4 a.m., she came back. They didn't come. Why didn't anyone come? I can hear it moving. It's been walking around the tent for an hour. I can hear it breathing. I transmitted back. Told her help was on the way. Told her to stay calm, to keep talking to me. Her voice was so quiet, I had to press the radio against my ear just to pass the words from the static. She went silent. This went on for 5 nights. Every night, just after midnight, she returned to Channel 9. Different coordinates each time, always moving deeper into the forest. I filled 2 pages of my field notebook with timestamps, positions, exact words. Her voice grew weaker each night, in a way that wasn't interference. It was the specific quality of exhaustion. The way language starts to fragment when a person has been afraid for too long. By night 4, she'd stopped using full sentences. It knows, it's been watching. Don't look for me where the trails end. The cold isn't the cold, it's it. That last one has stayed with me, in the way that certain phrases do. Not because I understand it, but because I have the specific feeling that somewhere beneath the surface of it, there is an understanding I am not equipped to reach. The cold isn't the cold. I've lived with that sentence for 3 years. Night 5, she came back one last time. Same whispered fragments. Same careful absence of volume, like she'd learned over the course of 5 days that sound was a liability. And then, mid-word, she stopped. Not static. Not a dropped signal. She stopped, the way a recording stops when someone presses a button. One moment a voice. The next, nothing at all. I gave dispatch everything the next morning. 5 nights of coordinates. Every word. Exact timestamps. I told them where she had described being on night 5. At 7:30 a.m., a search team found a woman's body approximately 3 miles into the forest from those last coordinates. Full camping gear, a small tent partially collapsed, her radio in her hand. The medical examiner placed time of death at 6 days prior. She had been dead before the first call ever reached me. When I submitted my notebook as evidence, my supervisor told me that the radio logs from my tower showed no activity on Channel 9 for that entire week. He told me the equipment carried no record of receiving anything. He used the phrase isolation-related auditory stress response in a tone that suggested he'd used it before about someone else in a different tower for a different set of sounds he didn't want documented. He had my notebook confiscated. Part of the investigation, he said. I have never received a copy of that investigation. I don't believe one exists. What I do have, and what I kept, because some part of me already understood what was coming, are photographs. Before they took the notebook, I photographed every page with my personal phone. Every coordinate, every timestamp, every fragmented sentence she spoke from inside a tent she'd been dead in for 6 days. I've looked at those photographs more times than I can count. I keep returning to one line in particular. Don't look for me where the trails end. The search team found her 3 miles past where the maintained trails end. I don't know if that's what she meant. I don't know if she was warning them away or leaving a marker, or if she was saying something else entirely that I'm still not equipped to pass. But I think about how her voice sounded on night 5 versus night 1. How it had changed, not just weaker, but somehow more deliberate, more composed, as if whatever fear had driven the first call had been replaced by something quieter and more resolved over the 5 days in between. I left Firewatch that spring. I've never gone back to the Pisgah, not even to drive through. Some locations hold their weight in a specific way, and you learn to give them the distance they've earned. I don't know how her voice kept transmitting. I don't know what she encountered in those woods before she died, but I know she spent her last hours of consciousness trying to warn someone. 5 nights of transmissions, moving through coordinates no search team would follow until it was days too late. She was warning us. She was trying, in whatever limited and terrible way was still available to her, to tell us not to look where the trails end. I never went back to find out what was there. Some questions are more dangerous than the dark they're hiding in. File 3. Nantahala National Forest, September 2017. A ranger found a camera still recording at an abandoned camp. The last thing it captured was a girl walking into the trees and looking back. My name is Derek. I want to say that before anything else, because by the time this account ends, you may reasonably wonder whether the person telling it can be trusted. I spent 12 years as a field ranger in the Nantahala before the incident. I haven't spoken to a single former colleague since I resigned. This is the only account I will ever give. It was September 14th, 2017, just before midnight. I'd received a report of an active campfire in a restricted backcountry zone, a closure area sealed due to drought conditions. Illegal fires in dry terrain are a serious escalation risk, and I took it seriously. I drove the fire road as far as it went, then hiked 2 miles by headlamp, using the smoke low as a bearing. I smelled the wood smoke long before the clearing came into view. When I broke through the tree line, I stopped walking. The camp was occupied in every sense except the presence of people. 2 dome tents, fully assembled, a folding table with a propane lantern burning, 4 camp chairs arranged around the fire, playing cards dealt out mid-game, face up on the table, a cast iron pot still sitting on the grate, whatever was inside still simmering, 4 place settings, 4 sleeping bags visible through the open mesh panel of 1 tent. The fire was freshly stoked. Whoever had been sitting around it had left within the last few minutes. I called out. Standard protocol. No answer came. I walked the perimeter with my flashlight and noted something that I've since tried to rationalize in every direction, and cannot. The woods around that clearing were completely silent. Not the natural quiet of a late September night. Silent the way a room goes silent when something has just happened in it. I began documenting the site for a citation and was looking for vehicle permits to identify the campers when I saw the camera. A Sony Handycam sitting on a flat boulder at the edge of the clearing. The red recording indicator was still lit. I should have bagged it as evidence without reviewing it. I know that. I've known it for 7 years. I picked it up and pressed play anyway. The footage opened on that morning. 4 college-age adults setting up camp, laughing, unremarkable in every way. I fast-forwarded through the afternoon, swimming in the nearby creek, dinner, cards. At 2:31 a.m., by the timestamp, all 4 of them stopped. No sound, no warning. All 4 went still at the exact same instant, mid-sentence, mid-shuffle, mid-laugh, and turned their heads to look at the tree line to the north. The camera was positioned on its rock, angled at the camp, with the northern tree line visible behind them. The fire was burning, and I could see maybe 20 feet into the woods. At the edge of that firelight, something was standing. I have spent 7 years searching for language adequate to describe it, and I haven't found any. It was tall, far taller than a person should be. It occupied the border between the lit and unlit space, in a way that made it simultaneously visible and resistant to being seen, as if the eye kept sliding off it, kept refusing to hold the image long enough to process it. It wasn't moving the way things move. It was between positions, present in one location, then present in another, with no perceptible transition between the 2 states. The 4 campers didn't run, didn't call out, didn't grab each other. One by one, calmly, they stood from their chairs and walked toward the tree line. Slowly, with no resistance, the way people walk toward something they've been expecting. The last one to go was a young woman with red hair. She stopped at the tree line, turned around. She walked back to the boulder. She picked up the camera. She pointed it at the tree line, held it there for 7 seconds, perfectly steady, and set it back down. Then she walked into the trees. The camera then recorded 6 hours of empty clearing. The fire burned to coals. The lantern flickered out. The cards scattered in a wind that came and left in under a second. Nothing else moved. Nobody came back. I turned the camera the next morning and filed my full report, the timestamp, the footage description, the physical descriptions of all 4 subjects. 2 days later, I asked for an update. My supervisor told me the camera had contained only corrupted files. He showed me a digital review log confirming it. The 4 students, 3 from the University of Tennessee, 1 from West Virginia University, a fall-break camping trip, were reported missing by their families 6 days after I filed my report. Their vehicles were still at the trailhead. They are still listed as missing persons. I don't go into the backcountry anymore. I don't camp. I live in a suburb outside Asheville now, with a streetlight visible from every window. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I find myself lying awake, thinking about the 7 seconds she held that camera pointed at the trees. Not at me, at the trees. She wasn't trying to identify it. I've come to understand that. She wasn't documenting it the way a frightened person documents something to prove it was real. She was pointing the camera at it, the way you'd point a camera at something you wanted someone else to find, like leaving a door open, like an address written down and left on a table. She looked at the camera before she left, not frightened. Something else. Something I've turned over in my mind across 7 years of nights and still haven't named correctly. Like she was sorry for what came next. And what came next was me, standing alone in a clearing in the Nantahala at midnight, holding a camera I should never have touched, watching footage of something that did not want to be seen. I think about whether it saw me watching. I think about that more than I probably should. File 4 is from Kentucky. A 7-year-old boy disappeared from a campsite and came back 4 days later, perfectly clean, perfectly calm, and asking when he could go back. In 42 coordinated search and rescue operations over 7 years, I had seen every version of how this forest returns what it takes. I thought I knew the full catalogue of outcomes. A 7-year-old boy named Caleb showed me I was missing the last page. My name is Jennifer. SAR Coordinator, Daniel Boone District, Kentucky. The family reported Caleb missing on a Thursday morning in July. He'd gone to use the bathroom in the night and never returned to the tent. Father found the empty sleeping bag at 6 a.m. By 7 a.m., we had 42 personnel, 4 search dogs, 2 drone units, and a helicopter flyover underway. We gridded 200 acres on day 1. Nothing. We expanded. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, nothing. Day 3, nothing. The temperature was climbing into the upper 90s. A 7-year-old, 72 hours of exposure in that heat. The projections at that point were not something I shared with his parents in detail. On the morning of day 4, Caleb walked through the front door of the ranger station. Not out of the tree line, not through the search perimeter. He walked up the gravel driveway, opened the glass door, and came inside the way you'd enter any public building. He was wearing the same pajamas he'd had on when he disappeared. They were clean. No mud, no grass stains, no tears. His hair was combed. His feet were bare and unmarked. The ER found nothing. No dehydration, no malnourishment, no injuries, no signs of any exposure. Blood work, completely normal. A 7-year-old boy had spent 4 days in southeastern Kentucky forest in July heat and come back healthier than he'd left. But he was different. And the difference was immediately apparent and impossible to adequately file in any incident report I know how to write. When his mother came into the hospital room and dropped to her knees and held him, he patted her back. Gently, slowly, the way you'd comfort a stranger you felt sympathy for but didn't know well. He didn't cry. He didn't cling. He looked over her shoulder with an expression I have spent 5 years trying to accurately describe. Calm and distant and faintly oriented toward something the rest of us couldn't perceive, like a person in a loud room was listening to something on the other side of the wall. He didn't say much initially. When he did speak, he asked when he could go back. His father asked, "Back to where?" "To the hallway in the trees," Caleb said. A child psychologist was brought in. Over the next 48 hours, Caleb drew the same image on every piece of paper he could reach. A long, narrow corridor of trees, perfectly symmetrical on both sides, as though they'd been planted by something that cared deeply about the geometry of the space between them. And at the end of the corridor, a light, not sunlight, a specific light. He colored it with yellow crayon. a small oval at the end of the tunnel. He drew it at least 30 times across 2 days. The proportions were identical each time. When the psychologist asked who he'd met in the hallway, Caleb said, "The man with the long fingers told me I'm not supposed to tell." He said that phrase 4 times over 2 days, to 4 different adults, in 4 different rooms, in the same words, in the same order, in the same flat, patient tone. Not like a child reciting something he'd memorized, like a child repeating something that had been placed inside him, with the specific instruction that it must come out intact. I was ordered to close the case as resolved. Child found unharmed. The official file was 3 paragraphs long. No mention of his physical condition on return. No mention of the drawings. No mention of the hallway. 3 weeks later, a colleague who'd been with the district longer than I had pulled me into his truck at lunch and slid a manila folder across the seat without saying a word. Inside, a case file from 1994. Mammoth Cave area, Edmonson County. A 6-year-old girl missing from a family camping trip. Recovered on day 4. Physically unharmed. Perfectly clean. Partially redacted, but one notation from the responding ranger had survived the redaction. Subject repeatedly references hallway in the trees and the man with long fingers. Recommend psych evaluation and case closure. No further investigation warranted. That case was sealed in 1994. I found the woman from that file. She's 36 now, living in Louisville. 3 months to locate her. Another month of emails before she agreed to speak. She still draws the hallway. Has since she was 12. She showed me one of her sketchbooks over video call. Hundreds of drawings, always the same corridor, always the same oval light at the end. She told me certain arrangements of trees make her feel pulled toward them in a way she can't override, only resist. She told me to stop looking into it. She told me she believed, whatever the man with the long fingers is, it notices when people start asking questions. She thought it had probably already noticed me. And then she said something that I have not been able to put down since. She said, "It doesn't take them forever. It just takes them long enough to put something inside them. And then it sends them back." I resigned 8 weeks after that conversation and moved out of Kentucky before the year ended. Caleb will be 13 now. I have stopped myself from reaching out to his family every time the thought surfaces. There is a category of knowledge that is worse than ignorance, and I have made my peace, or the closest available approximation of peace, with leaving that family in the category they're in. I hope he's all right. I hope what was placed inside him is quiet. I hope it isn't still drawing hallways. The last file came from West Virginia. She burned it herself. She was ordered to. What was written inside that cabinet had been written by 7 different rangers across 40 years, and none of them knew about each other. I won't use my name. If you need a reason for that, the next 20 minutes will give you one. I hired on with the Monongahela District in the spring of 2019. West Virginia backcountry, Dolly Swords territory, Eastern Corridor. If you haven't been to the Dolly Swords wilderness, the description that comes closest is, Canada dropped a piece of itself into the Appalachian Mountains and forgot about it. Spruce trees, open bogs, rocks that roll on past the horizon, beautiful in daylight. At night, it becomes something else, a quality of darkness, specific to that elevation and that geography, that even the veteran rangers talked about in a certain tone, the tone people use when they're being careful about what they say out loud. I worked that district for 3 years before I found the cabinet. Standard grey 4-drawer metal filing cabinet. Back wall of the equipment storage room. Nothing distinctive. No lock, no label, no mark that distinguished it from the general clutter of an understaffed ranger station. In 3 years, I'd walked past it probably 1,000 times without giving it a thought. One night in March of 2022, I was alone in the station, finishing quarterly documentation. I went into the storage room for a supply tote, and something made me reach out and pull open the top drawer. I cannot explain why. Some decisions arrive without deliberation. The hand moves, and the brain ratifies it afterward. I pull open the drawer. Inside, hanging in labeled folders, are 7 incident reports. I carried them to the break table and sat down. Each report was written by a different ranger, different years going back to 1981, but they all described the same stretch of trail, mile markers 34 through 41, Eastern Corridor, Monongahela, and they all described the same encounter. A figure on the trail, always at night, always between midnight and 4 a.m. A figure that did not respond to verbal commands, a figure that appeared to move without traveling. Rangers described it as existing in one position and then another, with no perceptible interval between. Multiple rangers noted that after the initial sighting, the figure appeared to follow their vehicle when they drove away from the site. Not chase. Follow, maintaining a constant distance, never gaining, never falling back, just keeping pace in the rearview mirror until the ranger reached the main road. No tracks were ever found at the encounter sites. Rangers who stopped and approached the lost position found nothing. No compression in the mud, no broken vegetation, no physical evidence that anything had occupied the space. The reports spanned 40 years, 7 different rangers. Not one of them had any documented awareness of the others, filed separately in different calendar years, with no cross-referencing notation in any of them. But the language across those 7 reports was so consistent it was disorienting. Specific phrases appeared independently, years apart from people who had never read each other's words. The last report was dated November 2021, 4 months before I was hired, written by my predecessor, the ranger whose position I'd taken, whom I'd been told had resigned unexpectedly. At the bottom of his report, circled in red ink, not part of the official form, written in the margin, in his own hand, "Do not patrol mile 34 to 41 between midnight and 4 a.m. Do not stop your vehicle. Do not get out. Do not acknowledge it." I sat with those 7 files for the better part of an hour before I heard the station door open. I want you to understand what that sound meant in that moment. I was alone in that station. It was past 11 p.m. The nearest occupied structure was 6 miles down a forest road. The sound of that door was the sound of the specific thing you are afraid of when you are that far from anything. It was a deer. It had pressed against the door. I know that because I stood up and looked, and that's what I found. But I want you to understand the 30 seconds between the sound and the knowing, the way those 30 seconds felt, because those 30 seconds are the most honest thing I can tell you about what it was like to hold those 7 reports in my hands. The next morning, my supervisor called me into her office. I knew from her face that the storage room had a camera I hadn't known about. She didn't mention the camera. She placed her hands flat on the desk, looked at me for a long moment, and spoke with the specific, calibrated stillness of someone who has had this conversation before and knows exactly how much to give. She said, "I know you went through the back room last night." She slid a black trash bag across the desk, then a green Bic lighter. She told me to take the files to the burn barrel behind the station, to burn every page, to come back inside when I was done. She told me this conversation would not be documented. She told me the cabinet in the back room did not exist, the files did not exist, and that mile markers 34 through 41 would be managed by a different patrol rotation going forward. I asked her why. She looked at me long enough that I understood she was measuring out the precise amount of truth that would produce the result she needed. She said, because the rangers who wrote those reports didn't stop writing them when they left the district. I did not ask what that meant. I did not ask anything else. I took the bag and the lighter and walked out to the burn barrel behind the station. I burned all 7 files. I watched 40 years of testimony go to ash, the pages curling black and bright at the edges, the marginal notation in red ink, the last thing I watched disappear. Then I walked back inside and submitted my letter of resignation before I reached my office. 3 weeks after I left, the ranger who took my position called my personal cell. She said she'd found a locked drawer in the back storage room. She asked me if I knew what was in it. I told her to quit that night. I told her not to ask anyone at the district, not to explain, not to wait until morning, just to leave. She laughed. She said I was being dramatic. I haven't been able to reach her since. 14 calls over 8 months. The line rings. No voicemail, no response. Her social media stopped updating 3 weeks after that phone call. I found her brother online and sent him a message 3 months ago. He told me she had left the position voluntarily and moved away, and that she preferred not to be contacted. Voluntarily. That was the word he used. I think about those 7 files. I think about 7 rangers across 4 decades writing the same words in their own handwriting, none of them knowing the others had written them before, none of them knowing the words had been written again and again, in the same margins of the same forms, going back to 1981. I burned them because I was afraid, because I was standing alone behind an empty ranger station in West Virginia in the early dark, and the tree line was 30 feet away, and whatever composure I'd been holding was gone. I burned them. I wish every single day that I hadn't, because whatever is on that trail between mile markers 34 and 41 is still there, and everyone who knows about it has either left the district or stopped responding, and the documentation that could have proved it is ash at the bottom of a burn barrel in the West Virginia mountains. And there's a new ranger walking that corridor at night right now who doesn't know what I know. And there's nobody left who's allowed to warn them. But there's one more thing. The thing I haven't told anyone. The night I burned the files, I drove back past the station on my way out of the district for the last time. I don't know why I took that route. I don't know why I slowed down when I passed the storage room window. The light in that room was on. I had turned it off when I left. I didn't stop. I kept driving, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror, because I understood in that moment, at a level beneath language, beneath conscious thought, that there are things you make worse by looking, things that interpret acknowledgement as invitation. I don't know what was in that locked drawer she found. I don't know if she's all right. I don't know if voluntarily means what her brother thinks it means. I know that somewhere on the eastern corridor of the Monongahela, between mile markers 34 and 41, something has been keeping pace with headlights in the dark for at least 40 years. Patient, consistent, waiting for the night someone finally stops the truck and gets out. I know that 7 rangers saw it and wrote it down and were made to disappear, not from the earth maybe, but from the record, from the official account of what that forest contains. I burned the files. The forest still has everything else. That's all the archive holds tonight. If something in these woods has found you too, submit your file, subscribe, and the next case is already waiting on your screen.